It was a cold and relentless night in Chicago. The rain poured heavily, drumming against the cracked pavement, cascading down the flickering neon sign of Haven Street Diner. The street was nearly empty, save for the occasional car splashing through puddles, their headlights momentarily cutting through the gloom. Inside the small, worn-down diner, Maggie Harper wiped down the counter, exhaustion weighing on her after a grueling 12-hour shift. The scent of burnt coffee and sizzling bacon lingered in the air, a familiar comfort in a place she had worked for years. As she wrung out a damp rag, movement outside the diner's window caught her attention. At first, she thought it was just another late-night passerby, but as she looked closer, her breath hitched. There, just beyond the glass, sat a small figure hunched in a wheelchair, his thin frame barely covered by an old, threadbare jacket. His dark hair clung to his forehead, drenched by the relentless downpour. He wasn't moving, just sitting there, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed edges of a worn blanket draped over his lap. Maggie's heart clenched. She knew that kind of stillness. It was the kind of stillness that came when a person had been left behind. Without a second thought, she tossed the rag aside and grabbed a clean towel from behind the counter. Pushing open the diner's door, she was immediately met with the icy bite of the rain, but she hardly noticed. She crouched beside the boy, lowering herself to his level. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, wrapping the towel around his small shoulders. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy flinched slightly at first, but then his wide blue eyes lifted to meet hers. There was a hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. I'm waiting for someone," he mumbled, his voice barely rising over the sound of the rain. Maggie glanced up and down the street. It was deserted. No cars, no hurried footsteps of a distracted parent, no sign of anyone coming for him. "Well," she said, keeping her voice light, warm, "you can't stay out here in this mess. How about you come inside with me? It's warm, and I have something special for you." The boy hesitated, his small hands tightening around his blanket, but after a moment, he gave a shy nod. Maggie smiled, relieved, and gently wheeled him inside. She settled him into a booth near the radiator, adjusting the towel so he could dry off. "I'm Maggie," she told him as she tucked a napkin onto his lap. "What's your name?" "Tommy," he answered, his voice soft, but there was the smallest hint of a smile forming. "Well, Tommy, you've got yourself a strong name," she said, giving him a playful wink. "Now, tell me, how do you feel about grilled cheese?" His blue eyes brightened, and that tiny smile grew. "I like grilled cheese," he admitted. Maggie grinned. "Good, because I make the best one in town." She didn't wait for a response before heading toward the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with a steaming plate, a golden grilled cheese sandwich, its edges crisp and buttery, paired with a warm mug of tomato soup. She placed it in front of him and tapped the table lightly. "This one's on me," she said. Tommy blinked up at her, surprise flickering across his face. Really, she assured him. "Eat up, kiddo." The first bite had him closing his eyes in pure delight, the cheese stretching in gooey strings between his fingers. "This is the best thing I've ever had," he said, his voice full of quiet wonder. Maggie laughed, sitting across from him, keeping the conversation light. His favorite colors, superheroes, whether he preferred pancakes or waffles. Anything to keep that little smile on his face just a little longer. What she didn't know was that someone was watching. Across the street, a sleek black Bentley sat in the shadows, its tinted windows catching the neon glow of the diner sign. Inside, Victor Grayson sat in silence, his sharp gray eyes locked onto the scene unfolding before him. He hadn't meant to sit there this long. He had only parked a block away, intending to step inside and grab his son after finishing a business call. But as he watched from the shadows, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. At 45, Victor was a titan of industry, a man who had built an empire on logic, strategy, and ruthless ambition. He had no time for sentimentality, no patience for things that couldn't be measured in profit margins. His life was sleek boardrooms, high-stakes negotiations, and a constant war for control. But in this moment, sitting in his car, watching this unknown woman kneel beside his son, feed him, keep him warm, something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. Tommy's nurse had quit that morning, leaving Victor scrambling to balance fatherhood with the demands of running Grayson Technologies. He had told his son to wait near the diner while he sorted things out. He had never once considered that someone might step in, not just to watch over Tommy, but to truly care. And yet this waitress, this stranger, had done exactly that. Victor pulled out his phone and dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered immediately. "Yes, sir. Clara," he said, his tone low but firm. "Get down to Haven Street Diner. Now." There was a slight pause. "Sir, no suit, no heels. Just jeans and a hoodie," he instructed. "I need you there in 20 minutes. Clara, ever efficient, didn't ask questions. "On my way." Victor leaned back in his seat, exhaling slowly. His mind was already racing ahead. He didn't believe in charity. He believed in paying debts. And whether this woman realized it or not, he owed her. Maggie trudged home through the rain, her sneakers soaked, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. The shift had been brutal: spilled coffee, a rude customer who barely left a tip, and a measly $12 in total earnings, half of which she had already slipped to the homeless man outside the diner. By the time she reached her apartment, all she wanted was to collapse onto her lumpy couch and forget the world existed, at least for a few hours. She fumbled with her keys, pushing open the creaky door to the small, dimly lit space she called home. It was barely furnished: a worn-out couch, a tiny table stacked with library books, and a fridge that hummed louder than it should. There was no TV, no unnecessary luxuries, just the bare essentials she could afford on a waitress's wages. She sighed, peeling off her damp jacket, but before she could take another step, a firm knock at the door made her freeze. No one ever knocked on her door at this hour. A strange unease settled in her chest. Slowly, she approached and peeked through the peephole. A tall man stood on the other side, his face shadowed by the dim light in the hallway. Even through the distortion of the peephole, she could see he was well-dressed, too well-dressed for this part of town. Her stomach tightened. Cautiously, she cracked the door open, just enough to see him clearly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. The man held her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Margaret Harper?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, who's asking?" He took a step forward, his presence commanding even in the narrow hallway. "Victor Grayson." She blinked, the name meaning nothing to her. When her puzzled expression didn't change, he added, "I need to talk to you." Maggie's grip on the door tightened. She wasn't about to invite a stranger into her home, especially not one who radiated the kind of quiet authority that made her instinctively wary. "What's this about?" she asked, keeping her voice firm. Victor exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "Yesterday, you helped a boy. Fed him, kept him warm." His gray eyes darkened slightly. "That boy was my son." Maggie's breath caught. "Tommy," she whispered, her mind racing. "Oh my God, is he okay?" Victor nodded. "He's fine. Better than fine, thanks to you." He paused, studying her. "He told me what you did, how you didn't charge him, how you treated him like he mattered." Maggie's shoulders relaxed slightly. "He does matter," she said simply. "He was cold, and he was hungry. I couldn't just leave him like that." Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. He slid it onto the small table just inside her door. Maggie frowned. "What's that?" "A job offer," he said. Her heart skipped a beat. "At what?" "I own Grayson Technologies," he said, as if that explained everything. It didn't. She stared at him, then at the envelope, her pulse quickening. I don't understand. Why would you be offering me a job?" "Because I don't need another executive," he said, his tone measured, deliberate. "I don't need another strategist or analyst or whatever other title people fight for in my company. I need someone like you." Maggie shook her head, overwhelmed. "Victor, I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about tech or business or whatever it is you do. I don't need you to," he said. "I need someone with a heart like yours. Someone who does the right thing when no one's watching." His voice softened slightly. "That's rare, Maggie. Rarer than you think." She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the envelope. It sat there like a silent challenge. "I don't get it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" Victor held her gaze, and for the first time, something in his cold, calculating eyes seemed almost vulnerable. "Because you saw my son," he said quietly. "Not my money, not my name, just him." He exhaled, his fingers tightening at his sides. "Do you know how few people do that?" Maggie's throat tightened. He gestured toward the envelope. "The details are in there. 6 figures. Benefits. A real chance at something better." Then his voice dropped lower, steadier. "Say yes, but on one condition." She looked up, wary. "What condition?" His lips barely curved into what might have been the shadow of a smile. "Never stop being kind." Maggie's breath hitched. She had spent years giving what little she had. $1 here, a free coffee there. But no one had ever offered her anything in return, let alone a life-changing opportunity. Her hands trembled as she reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing against the crisp paper. She looked back at Victor, searching his face for deception, for some hidden catch. All she found was quiet sincerity. She didn't know what to say, so she did the only thing that made sense. She said yes, and she had no idea that this was only the beginning. The first day at Grayson Technologies was nothing short of overwhelming. Maggie walked through the gleaming glass doors of the towering headquarters, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag, feeling entirely out of place. The lobby itself was larger than her entire apartment building, with polished marble floors that reflected the soft glow of the massive chandelier overhead. Employees in sleek suits strode past her, some sparing a glance, others barely acknowledging her existence. She could feel already the stares, the whispers. A waitress in a billion-dollar corporation? Victor had assured her that she didn't need to know tech, that he valued her heart and instincts more than a resume. But that didn't stop the murmurs as she stepped into the executive wing. She's the one he hired. What does she even do here? She must have something on him. A few employees whispered just loud enough for her to hear, their eyes flickering with curiosity, some with amusement, others with outright suspicion. Maggie lifted her chin, refusing to let their judgment shake her. She had come from far worse. If she could survive years of working double shifts just to keep a roof over her head, she could survive this. The first few weeks were brutal. She had no formal title, no set responsibilities, yet Victor expected her to be everywhere, sitting in meetings, listening to conversations, giving her input when something fell off. And though she had no business background, she quickly noticed things that others overlooked. She didn't speak in numbers or projections. She spoke in people. "Why does this contract sound so predatory?" she had asked in one meeting. Victor had raised a brow. The senior executives had laughed, until, upon closer inspection, they realized Maggie had caught something they had missed, a loophole that would have cost small vendors everything. After that, the laughter stopped. Victor, for all his hardened edges, listened. He trusted her instincts. And Tommy adored her. Whenever she visited Victor's penthouse, Tommy would light up. He'd chatter about his day, show her new books, tell her about school. His laughter filled the cold, modern apartment in a way that softened even Victor's guarded demeanor. She was no longer just the waitress from Haven Street Diner. She was becoming part of their world. But not everyone welcomed her presence. One afternoon, Clara burst into Maggie's small office, her usually composed expression tense. "We have a problem," she said, shutting the door behind her. Maggie sat up straighter. "What kind of problem?" Clara hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Someone's leaking sensitive company information." A chill ran down Maggie's spine. Victor ran one of the most powerful tech companies in the country. A leak could mean millions, billions, lost. Clara pressed her lips together. "Victor's furious." And she hesitated. "Someone saw you talking to a guy from a rival firm last week." Maggie's stomach dropped. It had been nothing, just a passing conversation with an old customer from the diner who had stopped by, curious about her new job. She had thought nothing of it. Now, it could cost her everything. Victor called her into his office that evening. The air inside was heavy, charged with something unspoken. He stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the glittering Chicago skyline, his expression unreadable. When he finally turned, his gray eyes locked onto hers, unreadable but sharp. "I took a chance on you," he said quietly. "Tell me I wasn't wrong." Maggie's throat tightened. She had never been accused of anything like this before. "Victor, I would never." His stare remained steady, waiting. Her heart pounded. "I swear, I don't know anything about this. I don't even understand half of what happens in these meetings. Why would I betray you?" Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, he sighed, running a hand over his face. The exhaustion in his posture wasn't just from this crisis. It was something deeper. "I believe you," he said at last. "But we need to find out who's really behind this." Maggie let out a shaky breath, relief flooding her. And so, she and Victor did what neither of them had expected. They worked together. They stayed late into the nights, going through records, watching patterns, piecing together the puzzle. And finally, they found him, a senior executive, one of Victor's trusted men. He had been feeding information to competitors for months, using Maggie as a scapegoat to cover his tracks. Victor fired him on the spot, and just like that, the doubts surrounding Maggie disappeared. The whispers in the office changed. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone Victor Grayson trusted. The years passed in a blur of long nights, impossible deadlines, and moments of quiet victories. Maggie had come into Grayson Technologies as an outsider, an anomaly, a waitress among Wall Street titans, an anomaly in a world that thrived on power and strategy. But little by little, she carved a place for herself, not by playing their game, but by changing the rules entirely. She built her reputation not with cold calculations, but with integrity. She was the one who questioned deals that felt too predatory, who ensured that contracts didn't just favor the company, but also protected the small businesses on the other end. She didn't use numbers to make decisions. She used instinct, humanity. And as much as the board resisted at first, they couldn't deny the results. Because somehow, kindness worked. Victor watched her rise with something that could only be described as pride. He had spent decades believing that success required ruthlessness, that the only way to survive in business was to be smarter, faster, and always one step ahead. And yet, Maggie was proving that there was another way. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. By the time she became vice president, no one questioned whether she deserved it. And yet, despite the power, despite the wealth, Maggie never forgot who she was. She still kept a few crumpled dollar bills in her pocket for the man who sat outside the diner. She still visited Haven Street on nights when the world felt too big, too loud, too far from the girl she used to be. She still made time to sit with Tommy, whether it was to help him with homework or to listen to his latest obsession with astronomy. She hadn't changed. She had just grown. The years passed, and before Maggie knew it, Tommy was 18. The little boy who had once sat outside a diner in the rain, wrapped in a too-thin jacket, was now sitting proudly in a wheelchair on a brightly lit stage, his high school diploma in hand. Maggie sat beside Victor in the crowded auditorium, her hands gripping the program, her heart swelling as she watched Tommy beam with pride. "I can't believe this," she whispered, eyes shimmering. Victor's gaze never left the stage, but there was something in his expression, something softer than the man she had first met. "Neither can I." As the principal called Tommy's name, the crowd erupted into applause. He rolled across the stage with confidence, shaking hands, flashing that unstoppable smile. A boy who had once been forgotten. A boy who had been waiting in the rain. A boy who had taught them both that kindness could change everything. Maggie swiped at a tear, laughing. "You're crying?" she teased. Victor shot her a look. "I don't cry." Maggie only smirked. After the ceremony, they took Tommy out for dinner, just the three of them. Not as a billionaire and his employee, not as a businessman and his advisor, but as a family. And as they sat together, Tommy still glowing with excitement, Maggie knew there was one more thing she had to do. That same year, she launched the Tommy Foundation, a charity dedicated to feeding underprivileged children across Chicago. She remembered what it felt like to go to bed hungry, to wonder if tomorrow would be any easier. And she knew, deep in her soul, that no child should ever feel that way. Victor funded the first donation. No hesitation, no questions asked. "You're building an empire," he told her. Maggie only smiled. No, she corrected. I'm building something that matters. The foundation took off, growing faster than she could have imagined. And for the first time, Maggie realized that her legacy wouldn't be the title on her office door or the salary she had fought for. Her legacy would be the lives she changed. One night, long after the world had gone quiet, Maggie stood in Victor's penthouse, looking out over the shimmering city lights. It had been years since that rainy night, years since she had first stepped into a world she never thought she belonged in. Victor joined her by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand. He didn't say anything for a long time, but then, almost too soft to hear, "You changed my life, Maggie." She turned to him, a small smile playing at her lips. "No, Victor," she said, "you changed mine." It was always the smallest things that made the biggest difference. A sandwich, a warm smile, a moment of kindness in the middle of a cold and rainy night. Maggie never could have imagined that the simple act of helping a little boy outside her diner would set her on a path that changed everything. She never expected that by offering him warmth and food, she would end up walking through the doors of a billion-dollar empire. She certainly never thought that the man who had built that empire, Victor Grayson, ruthless and untouchable, would be changed by her just as much as she had been changed by him. But that was the thing about kindness. It was never wasted. It moved, it spread, it reached places that no amount of money or power ever could. Years later, when Maggie stood before a room filled with investors and donors at a gala for the Tommy Foundation, she wasn't just the woman who had climbed the corporate ladder. She wasn't just the vice president of Grayson Technologies. She was someone who had seen what a single moment of compassion could do. As she took the stage, the room fell silent. She looked out at the faces before her, business leaders, philanthropists, people who had given millions to causes they believed in. And then, her gaze drifted to Tommy, now older, his once frail frame stronger, his smile just as bright as it had been that night in the diner. She thought about that little boy shivering in the rain. She thought about the man in the Bentley, watching from shadows. She thought about the journey that had led her here. With a deep breath, she spoke. "I used to believe that kindness was something small," she said. "Something you gave away without expecting anything in return. $1 here, a warm meal there. I never imagined it could change my life." She paused, scanning the room, her voice steady but full of emotion. But that's exactly what happened. Years ago, on a rainy night, I gave a sandwich to a little boy. It was such a simple thing. But what I didn't know was that his father, a man who had spent his life believing that everything had a price, was watching. And what I didn't know then was that I wasn't just feeding a hungry child. I was planting the first seed of something much bigger. She glanced at Victor, who sat at the front of the room, listening intently, his expression unreadable, but she knew him well enough now to see what others couldn't. That quiet pride, that rare, unmistakable softness in his eyes. "So, if there's one thing I want you to take away from tonight, it's this," she continued. "Kindness doesn't cost anything, but it can change everything. A meal, a job, a chance. You never know what one small gesture can do. You never know what it can become." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, a single pair of hands began clapping. Then another, and another, until the entire room erupted into applause. Maggie stepped back from the microphone, her heart full. She knew now, without a doubt, that the smallest gestures, the ones given freely, without expectation, were the ones that built the strongest legacies. Because sometimes, all it took to change the world was a grilled cheese sandwich and a little bit of faith. And so, in the end, it wasn't wealth, power, or status that changed lives. It was kindness. A simple, selfless act that set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Maggie didn't have millions. She didn't have influence. But she had a heart willing to give, and that made all the difference. This story is a reminder that we never truly know the impact of our actions. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a warm meal, a helping hand, a kind word, can create ripples that stretch far beyond what we can see. So, the next time you have a chance to do something good, take it. Not because you're expecting anything in return, but because the world needs more people willing to give without hesitation. You never know whose life you might change, or how it might change yours in return. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of kindness, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. And if you want more inspiring stories that touch the heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, all it takes is one moment of kindness to change everything. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.